Hi there, my name is Chris Macdonald. I'm a professor in architecture within the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture. Welcome back to the spring term. Hope you had a good break. Certainly, I know I appreciated the extra week that we got between Christmas and now. Anyway, I'm one of the four instructors who's going to be leading one of these option studios at this stage of the design sequence within our professional program. And I'm really looking forward to an engaged and productive term, notwithstanding the various protocols that we've inherited during this COVID era. So we seem to have even found some ways in which this form of communication is actually helpful and productive. So I'm hoping we can carry on in that spirit. I've been asked to introduce myself, and by way of introduction, I would say that I consider myself an architect rather than a scholar. And while I lead seminars and supervise thesis work, my primary emphasis through a long teaching career has been teaching design studio instruction, most specifically in the kind of MArch first professional program setting. This is not to say that I don't possess somewhat broad and even sometimes deep knowledge of our discipline, but rather that my interest is primarily speculative in its nature. That is to say, in the sense that the nature of all design propositions are a speculation about the future. This first image here is an image from my early professional practice with my partner Peter Salter, and it's for a proposed country house lodged between a river which happened to be full of trout, which is why the site was selected, and a kind of decayed orchard. On the one hand, it's a reminder that I've always participated in practice throughout my teaching career, but also it introduces the topic that was noted in the introductory sheet, that I'm particularly predisposed to thinking that the orthogonal section is an extraordinarily powerful tool to engage speculation about the logistics of space and structure. As a kind of poster boy or poster girl for the idea of complex section, this is the probably infamous section through the downtown New York Athletic Club, given notoriety in the publication of Rem Koolhaas's AA thesis as Delirious New York. Its notoriety and its inclusion in the thesis is in part because there's a series of disparate programs, sometimes disparate in scale, in their functional inclination, and in their composition vertically. And you know, both in scale and intent, these are kind of collaged together. The relationship between different programmatic elements is here rather terse and often mechanically enacted. But I think it serves as just as a sort of caricature of the idea of the section as a kind of vital and kind of powerful document. Throughout the studio, we'll move more deliberately to focus on the section as a tool to understanding transition as a space. And then because the section can demonstrate both spatial logic and constructional logic simultaneously, as well as the kind of interior elevations, it will help us also to look at this thematic of material as being an expressive element. Perhaps a more eloquent and intriguing example of the role of the section. This is a cross-section through the extension to the law courts in Gothenburg by Gunnar Asplund. It's an existing kind of Beaux-Arts, vaguely neoclassical building, and then a courtyard, and then the new addition on the right of the drawing. An incredible, if you look at the roof and the section in general, an incredible almost visceral manipulation of space and structure in the depiction of this new program. This is an example, the stair that you saw in the section previously is a slow stair for the public up to this kind of waiting area on the mezzanine. So this shows in the distance the arrival of that slow stair. On the left is the glazed screen that opens onto the courtyard, bringing a huge amount of light in. And then this kind of compressed space, which is really where members of the public wait while they're finding out what happens in the courtrooms. You can just see through the columns on the right is the kind of cousin of the slow stair, which is the quick stair, which allows passage up and down. And in this next slide, you can see the full extent of the kind of atrium space, the articulated structure of the vertical circulation, which is the elevator. And then to the right of the elevator, you can see the space that we were just in. And one of the many roof lights up above. In this case, the modulation of this space is a transition between inside, outside, between the kind of, quotidian realm of everyday people and the kind of private realm of the courts, which happens to the left. And the undeniably expressive intent of the veneered timber cladding. So that's maybe gets a little bit at some of the themes which were mentioned in the broadsheet. The site that we're going to be using is locating our projects is a kind of peculiar site. It's this is one end of it on a street called Prior Street. Main Street is to the right of this image. An existing single-story bank facade shoring up the presence of a new condominium project. But the curious thing about the block is that on the left, what would normally be a lane giving service to a deep commercial use at ground level out onto the main street as a frontage, is in the process of being transformed into a street. As far as I know, it's the only condition like this in certainly in central Vancouver. And so it's interesting in and of itself as a kind of urban condition to be operating in. This is from the other end. On the left, we see, so further to the left is Main Street. This is the Ivanhoe pub, and there's a kind of sort of backpacking accommodation up above. And here you see the kind of higgledy-piggledy nature of the new street emerging on the left, sometimes still very much operating as a service lane, and sometimes beginning to reveal itself as a kind of new ancillary front elevation. The intention over time is that this becomes a kind of fragment of a boulevard and a distinct public space in the city. For the first three sketch projects, we'll be looking at this infill site, these two blocks, or two plats, about midway along the block. This is looking from Main Street, looking east. And they'll be limited in their dimension, and this is looking at the larger context, also looking east. And you get a sense of the huge terrain which will eventually be occupied by the new St. Paul's Hospital and a whole array of new buildings which will supplement and extend the work of the hospital. So for the major piece of work that we'll be doing throughout the term, there'll be a freestanding building between that new street and the domain of the St. Paul's Hospital, which is in the distance, kind of beyond where these two individuals are standing in the kind of mid-ground. So the intent is to have a kind of mixed-use program of preoccupations which have to do with the proximity to the hospital, also to do with shoring up the existence of this new street, and acting as some kind of transitional document between the institutional nature of the hospital itself and the grain of the city beyond. The last thing I wanted to share with you is there was a rather enigmatic section, hand-drawn sketch section that existed as part of the one-page handout that you'll access on the web. This is the sketch drawing of the intended space that the architect Alejandro de la Sota was considering at the time. It's a school gymnasium in Madrid, remarkable building built in 1962. Here's a model that starts to articulate the manner of the organization and the structure. There's a lower level underneath the gymnasium, which has various kind of function spaces accessed from the street and utilized by the surrounding community. And then the whole thing is kind of stitched together with a complex of classrooms. And this is the space that you see in perspective as the space that was largely described by that cross section. There's spaces on the underside of the bleachers at a higher level, which are slightly Gothic kind of exercise and yoga spaces. But the extraordinary thing is where you see the soffit at the bottom of the truss and coming out, extending to the edge of the truss, there's actually a number of classrooms caught in the primary structure. So here we're between, you can see at the bottom, left and right, you can see the primary structure, which is making the big span, allowing the gymnasium to exist. And then using the configuration of the profile of the truss in section to create a stepped seating and then a raised podium for the lecturer to be delivering the class, and then lights out to the street on the in the distance. It was the first architectural project to be built out of steel frame. And there's no doubt that in this case, the notion that material as expression is carried through 100%. This is a slightly more detailed look at some of the connections in the structure, but it's to a large extent, when you're within the building, you're seeing a kind of almost a how it was done, or here's what's holding you up kind of essay as part of your experience of the space. And this is the space, you get to perhaps get a better sense of the scale of it. You can see where the classrooms are kind of jutting up above, and then the clerestory lights letting light in from the street side down into this space. I think the one-page written description of the studio is pretty straightforward about the three short sketch projects, what their kind of thematic preoccupation is, basically running a week each. And as mentioned, they'll be set in different ways in that kind of tough urban infill condition. The main project, as I say, will be to the east of that infill on the other side of this kind of street becoming a street, and be informed by the kinds of disparate programs that might begin to be suggestive of the New York Athletic Club, although hopefully with a more porous and kind of interconnected relationship as spaces within the structure. I think it'll be a project that you will be able to manage and explore in a really productive way, and kind of cut your teeth on designing a reasonably sized, reasonably complex freestanding building. And obviously there's much more to talk about in due course and as we begin the term. But if there are any questions arising from either this presentation or the questions of clarity from the little written blurb, I'm looking forward to our meeting on Monday, and hopefully we can answer any questions then. So as I said at the beginning, welcome. I think it's going to be an exciting term. I think each of the 4 projects is really stimulating and distinct. So let's go. All right. Thank you. Bye now.